Good afternoon. My name is Elise Herzig, and I have the joy and honor of being the Executive Director of JIAS Toronto, a settlement agency that has been serving newcomers, immigrants, and refugees for close to 99 years. We started off helping Jewish refugees that were fleeing Europe in the 1920s, and today I'm proud to say, close to 100 years later, we help and support, embrace, welcome all newcomers from multiple countries, and we are also we have a SAW status that allows us to do the private sponsorship of refugees. The topic of refugees is near and dear to my heart, as my father came to Canada as a Holocaust survivor in 1952 as a refugee. And so the program we're going to be sharing with you today is one that I find of not only for personal importance, but I think it's important to our Canadian history of helping newcomers and refugees in particular. We have a wonderful panel that I'm excited to be hosting and moderating today's webinar. But before I introduce the panelists, I do want to thank the Pathways to Prosperity group for allowing us this opportunity. This organization embodies the best of trying to share knowledge, lessons learned, and evidence-based information to help the settlement community across the country. And now let me introduce our speakers and share with you how the format of today's presentation will go. So we have three speakers in today's panelist. The first speaker is going to be Annie Shore. I'm not going to go into the bios, you have them in your information packages, but Annie has been a member of the JIAS team for the last number of years, and her specialty really is in working with our clients who have refugee clients who have experienced trauma. She has worked both in the one-on-one setting and in the programming. She has helped us in all areas of the refugee space, from applications for sponsoring of newcomer refugees coming to Canada, working with the constituent groups, to working one-on-one with our clients, providing settlement services, and also developing and designing programs that are relevant, meaningful, and impactful for this community. Our second speaker is going to be Judy Adler. Judy Adler is what I consider to be an adopted member of the JIAS family. Judy has a fascinating background that started her career off in technology, where she was a chief technology officer in the corporate world. And then when she decided to embark on a second career, she turned to becoming trained as an English as a second language teacher, so she could help a community that she felt very close to. She has both volunteered with JIAS, she has worked as a consultant to JIAS, but whatever she does with our organization, it helps elevate our clients' opportunity to settle in a way that they feel like they truly belong in Canada, and that they know that they have a group that wants them to succeed. Our third speaker can't be joining us in person today, as she's taking a course and she's registered in a program for social service. It's Faheemah Qaaydi. I'm not going to pronounce this properly, I apologize. Qaaydi. Faheemah recently joined the JIAS team. In addition to being a welcome addition to our JIAS family, she does part-time settlement work with our refugee community, and being a lovely, fine, and the person who really you see tries to bring out the good in every situation. She has been really instrumental in helping us understand how to work with the Yazidi community. She has worked with refugees both in Canada and abroad. Her expertise in working with the Yazidi community is of her personal experience of having come from that community to Canada in 2014 from Iraq, and she will be sharing the story of her son's experience on the program you're going to learn more about today. So the format for today's session is going to go as follows. You'll be hearing from Annie on their work on our program that we did for Yazidi children last summer. You will be seeing a video that Faheemah prepared. During any point in their presentations, if you have a question you would like answered, please post your question in the chat line. I will be taking notes on all of your questions, and the speakers will answer all the questions at the end of the session. Feel free to post comments, anything you want more clarity on, or if there's something in particular that you would like us to dive a little deeper on, we'd be delighted to do so. And with that, I am going to pass it on to Annie.
So thank you, Elise, for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here today with all of you. Today, as Elise mentioned, we're going to be talking about a virtual school support program that we ran for the Yazidi community. Judy, the next presenter, will talk more about the specifics or the how-tos of that program. But I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background about the Yazidi community to give some context. And then after Judy speaks, I'm going to come back on and share some of our big picture lessons learned and where that took us in our programming. So Yazidi is a religion. The majority of the Yazidis lived in rural Iraq with other Yazidi communities in the surrounding countries. The community we're talking about today, though, is from Iraq, and they really had a unique set of experiences. They are a strong and resilient community. They have rich traditions and a really strong sense of communal identity, but they are also a community that have really been through some of the most horrific traumas one could imagine. In 2014, ISIS entered Yazidi villages and destroyed the community. They killed thousands of men and took thousands of women and children into captivity. And there are still roughly 3,000 Yazidi women and children in ISIS hands. So while families in Canada are safe now that they are here, many of their loved ones are not. The community is still really in the middle of their trauma, with most, if not all, of the individuals here having family or friends or other community members still in captivity or in unsafe conditions. So the genocide is ongoing for this community. JIAS started working with Yazidi families in late 2017. We had worked with some privately sponsored families from the community, but in 2017, we were also asked by IRCC to start working with some of the government-sponsored families as well. JIAS is a sponsorship agreement holder, and we are also a settlement agency. So when we were approached by the government, we took those lessons learned and the model we had developed from our previous years of working with privately sponsored refugees and applied that model and that level of assistance and volunteer involvement with these families. The Yazidi community in the GTA consists of approximately 250 people, so it's actually quite a small community. There's almost half of those are children under the age of 18, and there are about 50 to 60 kids between the grades of 1 and 9, and that was our target population for this program. Many of the families JIAS is working with are single mothers whose husbands were either killed by ISIS or are still missing, and most have been in Canada for approximately 2 to 4 years. Many of the families, both mothers and children, had little or no access to education prior to coming to Canada, and that was for a variety of reasons. For children, this means that it is an additional struggle in learning how to read and write for the first time, but in a second language. And for parents, in the context of their children's education, it means that they don't quite understand what their children are experiencing in school. So parents are working extremely hard to help their children thrive in Canada, and they all want their children to get the best education possible. However, without having been to school themselves, they are disempowered in the process of, and disempowered really in becoming involved in their children's educational world. So for example, understanding how to communicate with teachers without English language skills, or how to create a conducive environment, a conducive learning environment at home, are things that parents are continuously working on. And this is also something that we are also working with parents on, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when I come back at the end of the presentation. So that was just a little bit of an introduction to the population. I'm now going to turn it over to Judy, and she's going to talk about the details of our program and, like I said, some of those how-tos of the summer program, and then I'll join back later for some of our big lessons learned.
So I want to thank you all for coming to this presentation, and thank Elise for that lovely introduction. I was very, very happy when JIAS asked me to be part of this project. And before I go any further, I just want to tell you my JIAS story. Because like many people at JIAS, I started with JIAS long before I worked with JIAS, either as a volunteer or as a consultant. I grew up hearing that JIAS is the thing that allowed my parents to settle and grow in Canada. My parents came in 1956 as Hungarian refugees. My father was a medical doctor. He had to redo his certification. And in order to do that, he had to go back to school for 2 years, and they came with no money. And JIAS paid for my father's education and for my parents' living expenses. And I grew up knowing that everything that followed, my going to school, my getting my degrees, my everything follows from JIAS. So working with JIAS is a pleasure and an honor. So as a reminder, as a part of this presentation, please put any of your questions into the Q&A, and Elise is monitoring that, and she will ask us those questions at the end. Let's see. So this part of the presentation answers the question, what? What was the problem to be solved? What were the obstacles to be overcome? How did we do it? And what's in our future? We want to give you some of the questions you need to ask if you wanted to run a program that was something similar, as well as the answers that we found. This was a pilot project. If we ever run a program like this again, and I hope we do, I'm sure there'll be more questions and likely different answers, but we learned a lot doing this. So what were we asked to do? We were asked to create a modified Ready for School program for the Yazidi community. Ready for School is a very successful JIAS program that combines information about Canada with an introduction to the school system in Ontario. I was one of the teachers in the program prior to the pandemic. It was designed to facilitate the integration of newcomer students into the primary school system. It was also used to provide volunteer opportunities for high school students and expose them to the world of volunteer work for JIAS. It combined class time with field trips, such as going to the library, having fire trucks come and visit police, and of course, we made sure the students had fun. Class sizes were up to 25 children per teacher, and they were streamed into 3 levels based on age. None of this was possible during the pandemic. So how do you adapt to this? An online class with students who have been in Canada for some time. Not all of them are strictly newcomers, but are struggling. And except for students entering grade 1, they were all behind where they should be. Finally, hit the ground running very quickly. Planning for the Yazidi program started in March, April, just at the beginning of the pandemic. But this online version only started in mid-June, and the program was running by mid-July. So very short time frames. So what were the biggest challenges? Well, let me tell you, I really felt it like times we were running the hurdles at the Olympics. I'm just going to go over the 4 biggest challenges, but this is by no means a comprehensive list. These are just the highlights. And if I wanted to talk about challenges, I could probably talk for a couple of hours and still not cover them all. But the one important thing that I want you to take away is that you have to be very diligent and observant. Unlike in a regular classroom where you can walk around and see what the students are doing and you can make changes, you're really limited by the technology. And if the student turns off their camera, you have no insight at all as to what's going on. So that made the programming, the curriculum, everything we did that much more important. We had to make sure that we kept these students engaged and that we were actually benefiting them. So let's start with the curriculum. So there are many factors besides just the pedagogy of designing a school program, school curriculums, right? So there are all kinds of well-known things that you should do and shouldn't do that you know will work in a classroom, a regular classroom with a teacher. But you can't really do that in this environment. Many families have multiple children enrolled, and the families are like one big interconnected community, and they talk to each other regularly. We needed to find a theme that was useful and appropriate and would work from grade 1 to grade 9, or students who'd finished grade 8. And so we picked Canada and the GTA. That's something that no matter, as a newcomer, you always feel like you can learn more. So it was useful, it was appropriate. Every class had the same daily plan. So this helped us in a multitude of ways. First, it allowed all the children to be learning about the same thing on the same day. It allowed them to talk outside of school hours with other kids who were in the program who had the same experiences and to share with their families. That was one side. The other thing it really helped with is teachers. So because everybody was working on the same thing on the same day, they could share ideas. So they would have resources and they could scale them up and down. Everybody was looking at the same problem at the same time. So that really, really helped. But another thing we had to be very careful of is the high level of trauma that Annie mentioned. So we had to be very careful that everything we talked about, or that we reduced the chance of triggering. So we were very selective. You know, when you talk about the history of Canada, there are certain topics that you might want to include, but we purposely chose to steer far away from them because we wanted the program to not trigger any bad memories. One of the other elements we wanted was field trips. So we had field trips in Ready for School. How do we have field trips here in this virtual environment? So we did some videos. We had a video about Canada, and we took the students across Canada from the East Coast to the West Coast. We took the students around the GTA, going on roller coasters at Wonderland and walking on the glass floor, well, not the glass floor, but the plastic floor at the CN Tower. And that was exciting. And then we had a virtual field trip to Ripley's Aquarium, where they very nicely assigned somebody to work with us who customized their regular tour to accommodate our students. And then we had an Indigenous drumming circle. So those were all things that the students really enjoyed and gave them a taste of Canada. And then in addition, the final thing we had was an art therapist. So we wanted to combine an element of therapy to help these children deal with the trauma they'd experienced. And there was a whole way of working through technology to get the art therapist to be able to teach and work through Zoom. So finally, we had to make sure that the technology would support all of this. So it was a challenge building the curriculum. It's not enough to, I've studied in school how to build curriculums. I understand the pedagogy behind it, but that really was only a small part of what we had to do here. Our next challenge was assessment. So here we had this great plan. We created a basic literary assessment. We spent a lot of time on it. We allocated 20 minutes per student. We booked the time. We were going to use Zoom. Every student had a school supplied computer. We were going to use the computer. It was going to be great. We were going to find out all this stuff. And then reality hit. The school supplied computers only work for school stuff. We couldn't use them. And the students had nothing else at home except for their smartphones and WhatsApp. So we came up with 5-minute WhatsApp assessments where we wrote letters on pieces of paper, I wrote letters on pieces of paper and words, and we held them up. And for example, one of the things that we found was that while a child might know the letter A, the child couldn't connect that to the sound made in Apple. So that connection that starts very early was missing for a lot of the students, and that really impedes their literacy. So that was a big surprise, the lack of literacy despite 2+ years in Ontario schools. I mean, 2+ years, even without including the pandemic. So it showed us really that this project was really needed, this pilot program. And we ended up with these 5-minute WhatsApp assessments. And our other surprise was that the assessments were accurate. We ended up assessing 52 children, and only one child had to move levels, and that was to move up. So that was a nice surprise. The lack of literacy, a not so nice surprise. The next challenge was staffing. So when JIAS approached me for this program, they told me that there would be approximately 20 students and they thought 3 teachers and me, an art therapist, 20 students, we're all set. And we planned for 20 students, and the teachers were hired for 20 students, and the supplies were ordered for 20 students. And as word spread through Annie's good work, we ended up with over 50 students. We assessed 52. Of 52, 48 were enrolled in the program. For various reasons, for the students, it didn't work out, but we ended up with 48 students. So you can't do this program on Zoom, 48 students and 3 teachers. It's just not going to work. So hiring the number of teachers required was a huge challenge. And then who do you get to teach this? We really wanted to make sure that we had qualified teachers. So we used Ontario certified teachers or Ontario certified English language teachers, so that we ensured that the teachers knew how to teach and hopefully had been exposed to technology, because after all, by then, anybody who's been teaching has been teaching on Zoom. We wanted class sizes to be a maximum of 7 per teacher. And we realized really that the students needed more support than we thought. The art therapist, it was absolutely amazing, but we had to work with her to teach her how to adapt her work through Zoom. So she's used to sitting one-on-one with a child and working with them. All of a sudden we're on Zoom where you may or may not be able to see the child. And the way we did it is we broke the curriculum so that Tuesday and Thursday were teaching days, and Wednesday we did a mix of either art therapy. Well, we did art therapy and a field trip, and we alternated. So we split it into 2 groups of 24. So that's a lot of people for one art therapist to work with. And then here I've broken down our field trips, and we had challenges with the field trips too. So we made these wonderful videos. They were 40 minutes long. And the challenge there was just making the videos. But we actually were not planning an Indigenous drumming circle. We were planning something else. And 48 hours before, we got a phone call saying, sorry, we can't do it. You'll have to find something else. We could do it sometime in September. And we're like, yeah, but the program ends in the middle of August. End of September isn't going to do it for us. So there was this whole scramble of finding a suitable alternative. So with Canadian content, trauma informed, appropriate for the audience. So we ended up with an Indigenous drumming circle, and I think the kids really enjoyed it, because one of the things that you have to do is you have to engage the kids. You have to get them moving. So, you can see it. The kids, they're drumming, the kids are drumming, that's great. Standing still and just, watching a video, not as great if the video isn't specifically designed with this in mind. Our next challenge, and probably the one that caused me the most sleepless nights, was technology. So we started off with this plan. We're using the school board computers. It's going to be simple. Everybody has them. The kids have been using them. The teachers know how to use them. And then that fell apart. So what are we going to run this program on? They don't all have laptops. We can't really run this program through WhatsApp. WhatsApp, I can do a group chat, but that's really not sufficient. So we ended up with Amazon Fire tablets, and we had to run around and buy 50 Amazon Fire tablets. And there were all kinds of challenges with the Amazon Fire tablets, such as they changed models in the middle. So then what worked on one didn't work on the other. So you have to adapt to that. How do you get the students to know how to use the Amazon Fire tablets? What platform are we going to use? We settled on Zoom. And remember, Zoom is an emerging technology. And one of the fun things was that you would set something up, and then Zoom would send out some enhancements, and the whatever you did didn't work. So we used breakout rooms. so that we were one big classroom with 7, well, actually 8 breakout rooms. And that way we had each class had its own classroom and its own teacher, and we had a room that was what we called the principal's office, where we went for individual problem solving. We enabled chat so the students could chat with each other as much as they could write. We created short videos and provided training on the fire tablets. We trained the teachers and we trained the teachers and then we trained the teachers again. We worked with all the field trip staff to make sure that they understood our platform. We found 4 additional teachers in 4 weeks, hired them and took them through the curriculum. And we really worked hard on stressing how important it is to engage with students on this platform, because it's very different than in a classroom. I mean, I can see if you're falling asleep in class, but if you turn your camera off, I don't know if you're there. There's one problem we couldn't solve, and that is if you have multiple students in one family on the internet connection, you overwhelm the internet connection. And so at times we actually had to tell the students to turn their cameras off, because otherwise they were continuously dropping out of the session. And I think if we when we run this program again or a similar program, that's something we really have to figure out, how to allow multiple family members to use Zoom at the same time. So this is what we actually did. We had 7 classes in 3 levels. We had a class can't read, doesn't know the alphabet, or maybe knows most of the alphabet, can read basic words. So could read the dog and cat ate food, but couldn't read much more than that. And then we had a 3rd level, which is they could read, but really none of them could write fluently. The 3rd level, level 3, we had only 1 class, and none of them were at the end of grade 1 in reading level. So we're really talking about a community that's behind. I mean, you think that we had kids who are entering grade 9, they've been in school for more than 2 years, and they really don't know their alphabet. So was really a struggle. We did the programming 3 days a week for 4 weeks, and we integrated with Project Abraham, and they did the other 2 days. We had regular staff meetings and training. So we really worked hard in supporting our teachers, because we knew that this would be hard for them. You know, it's one thing to teach in a classroom and get that instant feedback, but it's difficult when you've never met these kids, you've never met the other teachers, you don't know the support staff. So in fact, one of our teachers was based in the UK, and she was on Zoom, but there was no way we could hold her hand. So the staff meetings and the training were really important. And the other thing we did is we used WhatsApp. And we had a number of WhatsApp groups. We had one for the JIAS staff, so we could talk about programming details. We had one with the teachers, and the teachers used that a lot. So, hey guys, tomorrow we're talking about the libraries or police or services in the community. Do you have any resources? And they shared their resources, and that really lessened the load for all of them. So a lot of the resources could be scaled across levels and then changed, right? You would have a different conversation about a picture of a fire hall with students who were in level 3 than you would have with students in level 1. And then finally, we used it also to communicate with the parents, so we could put out a reminder notice. Faheemah did that for us. She would put out a reminder notice every day saying, okay, guys, school starts in an hour. Originally, we planned to hold the classes in the morning, but that turned out to be a bad fit with the community culture, so we moved them to the afternoon. And we had a really interesting challenge, which is we had to create material and give it to the students, right? It was good for them to have something in their hands. So we created a box for each student, and we made file folders for each day, which had the material for that day. So that you can imagine if you handed a stack of papers like this and told the teachers to work with the kids and, okay, find this sheet of paper, and who knows what you would find. So we put every day in its own folder, So the teachers knew that the kids knew and the teachers knew that everything they needed was in that folder. And all they had to do was find that one folder. And to make it more fun, we put a snack in each folder. So every day there was a break time and the kids could have their snack. Now, as you expect, some kids had snacks on the last day and some kids had an awful lot of snacks on their first day, because as soon as they figured out there was a treat in those folders, they opened up every folder. But generally it worked well. The challenge, of course, was doing all this during a pandemic, socially distanced, and somewhere out in the internet, but I don't quite know where, is a picture of Annie and the rest of the team all masked and gloved in the scorching sun, sorting boxes and packing 52 boxes and then delivering each of those boxes along with a fire tablet to each family and then getting them set up. So really, that was a pandemic puzzle that we solved. So what's next? Well, the program worked well. And what's next is we're running, so it's actually not next, it should say what's now, is the Yazidi literacy tutoring program. So many of the same students, the ones I saw in the summer, are back. We're focusing on literacy, on reading. We're doing it again through Zoom. But we did hour-long assessments this time, and we've got a lot more specific information. You can imagine now that they have a tablet and they know how to Zoom, I can do a proper assessment because it's very limited. I mean, I was thrilled that what I could do through WhatsApp, but no teacher would actually call that an assessment. And, you know, because budget is a reality, right? And you have to think about how much money do you have and how big is the need. We're using volunteer tutors, not teachers. And we've been incredibly lucky that a large number of our tutors are actually teachers. But we're training them and we're spending a lot of time, again, training, teaching how you teach literacy, how do you work with this population, and how do you use the technology? Because it's the same thing. It's always the same thing. How do you keep the students engaged? How are you diligent and observant on Zoom? It's just so different than sitting next to somebody and opening a book. So that's where we're at. And we are allowing for one-to-one meetings twice a week. And that's something we couldn't have done with teachers. So that's also been very positive. So I think this is the most important slide. Here's what we did. We actually did it. We created an online summer program to support school readiness and improve literacy, and we did it in 4 weeks. And I'm still kind of in shock that we actually managed. We adapted to the challenges. I mean, we figured out each step of the way had challenges. How are we going to solve them? How can we be creative? What can we do differently? You know, what does theory tell us we should do? And then what does reality tell us we can do? And we used technology in every which way we could. And it turned out, though, the technology seemed to some people at times overwhelming. Once they started using it, it actually became straightforward and they managed. We learned an awful lot about the educational needs of the community. So I came into it thinking, okay, there'll be some students who, you know, are behind, but there'll be students who are at level. After all, some of them have been in school for 3 years. Surely they're reading. So that was a big surprise to see how far they are. And another thing, I think I had it on an earlier slide, but I didn't talk about it, is when we asked the parents, how is your kid doing in school? 80% of the parents said their children have learning issues. So that's not a scientific diagnosis. Nobody went to the doctor and said, does this kid have, you know, does my kid have learning issues? But the parents are saying they know their children are struggling. And we really saw that. And we've created a template that we can use in other communities. So we didn't build a one-off model, but we built a model that we can expand on and change. And maybe we'll get a chance to do that. And I can't stress enough these 2 points, flexibility and adaptability. That was really, you had to go into it thinking, okay, there are lots of roadblocks and I'm going to solve the roadblocks. We couldn't say, okay, well, the school computers don't work. So we don't have a platform. Okay, let's cancel the program. That wasn't really an option. So it was all about that. And we set up a follow-up program that's running today and is successful. But the key to success, which isn't listed here, is the team. Annie, who you see here, Faheemah, who you'll see in a video in a moment, Naomi, Jody, and Julietta from JIAS, who are not here, and then, of course, the direction and leadership of Elise. And that's really what made it possible. Without the whole team, the wonderful teachers, the art therapists, nothing would have worked. So again, I want to thank you. I want to remind you to put the questions into the Q&A, and I'm going to turn it back to Annie.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for sharing that information with us all. And I have to just say that Judy was really wonderful in this program. We really couldn't have made it happen as successfully without Judy's expertise. So thank you, Judy. Before I go into some of our lessons learned on the bigger picture, I just wanted to acknowledge our funders, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and our other wonderful donor. And I also really want to thank them for their flexibility during this time. For this program, we were able to do things such as use funds that we had originally allocated for the cost of transportation, but instead we were able to purchase those tablets for each child to use. We were also able to hire more teachers than we had originally anticipated. So that flexibility really allowed us to pivot how we were delivering the program. And of course, none of this would have been possible without IRCC and their support and leadership in working with this community. All of our funders also had the opportunity to observe some of the sessions and come to the classes and provide their feedback as well. And I also think that's one of the advantages of this online forum, that you can just, we had them able to come and just pop into the lessons, and they didn't have to leave their own homes. So that was nice. And then I also want to thank Project Abraham, which is an organization that Judy mentioned. We work quite closely with them for this community, and we were really able to work collaboratively in this program. They were one of the keys to our success in having so many people attend, and they shared this program with their clients. And as well, we were able to share our platform for this program so they could facilitate 2 days a week of programming. So for 1 full month, while camps were closed and other programs were closed, all of these kids had access to some programming for a few hours a day. So while JIAS shifted more and more of our programs online as the pandemic, as we saw that it wasn't coming to an end anytime soon, we actually had a lot of concerns about how this would work, how an online program would work for this specific community. Some of the questions we asked ourselves were, how do you provide an online program to a community that is mostly illiterate? Families don't have emails, or they may have them, but they don't really know how to use them, or they can't read an email or the content of an email. So we couldn't send out a link and have them log on like we all did today. We had to be a bit more creative in that. As Judy also mentioned, do these families have the technology they need to join an online program? And it turned out all we really had to do was just be creative to overcome these barriers. And it meant a little bit more work on our part. We had troubleshooting problems with tablets. We had to practice with each family how to log on. We had a few broken tablets. We had to really talk families through every step of the way. And we did this through interpreters. And we were also fortunate enough at that time that the weather was nice and the restrictions were such that we could go to families' homes and meet them outside and troubleshoot in a socially distanced way, wearing masks, but we could kind of have a little bit of that in-person troubleshooting experience as well. And Judy also mentioned WhatsApp. A lot of our communication with families is through WhatsApp, and we do use that in other contexts in our work with them as well. And that's because the mode of communication, it's the mode of communication that the community uses between themselves, and it's a technology they're comfortable with. And I did notice there was a question in the chat about that. And I do have to say that since the start of our work with this community, we've exercised an abundance of caution in how we use it and what information is transmitted through that. We use it, instead of picking up the phone and calling a family, maybe we use WhatsApp so that it gives them a little bit more time to go and translate something if they need, or they can bring the phone and their kid can translate that message or something like that. So we just found that an easier way of communicating rather than picking up the phone and calling families. We also learned a lot about the capacity of individuals and their capabilities. I had a lot of concerns about how successful, once we got the families online, how successful would it be to actually use Zoom on a daily basis. So I was just worried about things like, could they mute and unmute themselves, turn their videos on and off? And really, they adapted quite well, both parents and children. This program also allowed us to build trust with the community in this pandemic virtual world that we are all living in right now. Since then, we've been able to facilitate many more programs with this community online by using the same logon. So just as if you had a community center, in a community center, you had a room booked every week that the community would know and they could come and drop into a program, that's kind of how we've been using Zoom for this community. We find that people are participating more. We find more people are participating, and more people are participating regularly in programs as well. One of the advantages of this online forum has been that has actually allowed us to call families about an hour before each program. So I'm sure many of you know from your work in newcomer communities that Canada is a society that is very fixed to a clock, and it is an adjustment for newcomers that come from societies that are not. As well, we know from this community that trauma has impacted their memory and retention of information, and in general, remembering to attend scheduled appointments is something that we're constantly working on with families. So this has actually been a real advantage in terms of participation in our programs. Judy discussed the literacy level of the community. So for us, another major takeaway was from this program, we were able to identify a real community struggle with literacy and with gaining literacy skills, which we were able to do from those individual assessments that Judy discussed. We've been working with families, with the Yazidi families since since 2017. And we know that individual children are struggling in school. And we have had those conversations with teachers and with schools, but we've done that on an individual basis. And this program was our first opportunity to offer programming to the entire Yazidi community. And I also believe that because of closures and the online platform, that probably led to higher participation rates as well. So really, we had the situation where almost all of the kids between grades 1 and 9 in the Yazidi community registered for the program and participated regularly, and all of those kids were assessed. So we took those assessments, we ran the statistics, and we really were able to see what is happening in the community. Research shows that refugees take longer than other populations to catch up to their peers, other newcomer populations, that is, and that's by nature of their peri, and post-immigration experiences, such as just access to prior education, or perhaps trauma that's impacted detention and retention of information, and other issues. But even understanding this, we still found that the children were below what we would have expected. So this was an eye-opener for us, and we knew we had to make this as one of our priorities in our work with the community. Overall, the program was a great learning experience for us. Not only did we learn how to do online programming, but it also directed our longer-term programming with the community, and also informed our holistic approach to working with the community, especially in building literacy skills. So as Judy mentioned, we have developed our literacy tutoring program, a volunteer-based program focusing on literacy. And we've also started a parent group that we have been running since September. We actually noticed that when we offer children a program, the parents were more likely to participate in programs for themselves after they saw a successful program for their children. And so at the end of the summer program, we got the parents together and we asked them if they would like to meet regularly and discuss issues related to school, and they said yes. So we meet weekly and we discuss issues related to their children's education, how parents can become more involved in their children's educational world so that they can really understand their role and have agency in the system. And essentially, with the group, we share information, but we have a lot of discussions and opportunities for parents to learn from one another. It has been such a successful group that we've branched out to other issues. We've talked about learning disabilities, about puberty, about bullying, substance abuse. And now we've shifted the conversation to how parents are doing themselves. Things like how parents are coping with the COVID lockdown. And we've also invited a trauma-informed yoga instructor who comes every few weeks and does a session with us. And another benefit of this program is that it's really breaks that feeling of isolation that a lot of us are feeling these days during a lockdown. They get to see their friends, they feel part of a community, and they've shared that it's very nice for them to have this time together when they can't be together in person. And they have also shared that they don't want the program to end, which is, I think, a great sign, a great indication of a successful program. So just to summarize, some of our lessons learned were that we were able to overcome what we perceived as a barrier in accessing services. We built trust with the community that has now allowed us to provide ongoing programming throughout COVID. And we were also able to shift our lens from looking at the struggles in school from that individual level to a community level, and it has really informed our holistic approach to programming. So that's all I have to share today. Thank you everyone for coming or for participating in this. And now Elise is going to play a short 5-minute video clip from one of our participant parents, Faheemah, who she mentioned before, who is also now part of our JIAS team as well.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you both, Judy and Annie, for your great presentation. So now I'm just going to share my screen so you can hear from Faheemah directly. And I'm sorry you're not getting to meet her in person because she is just so wonderful.
Hi everyone, my name is Faheemah. I am Danny's mother who attended summer program with JIAS agency. And I'm glad that he attended such a program. He had an opportunity to see all his friends there. And then it felt safe for him because he doesn't like going outside. He's so young. He's usually with the family, so he had an opportunity to study online and to see his friends at the same time in the program. And then actually it was a friendly environment, so he was very happy during that program. He had an opportunity to share everything with his friend, with the teachers. The teachers were engaging. They give all the students to share whatever their ideas are, and then they were very respectful of all the kids' situations. For Danny now, it had an impact on his learning actually. Like he could read better now, and then his reading became more proper and then more understandable. All the pictures and all the resources that JIAS have sent to him, and especially he didn't have a tablet to study on, so the JIAS agency, they send him a tablet to study on it, and all the resources that's needed for the program, which was very helpful for him and many other families from the community. They shared that they were glad, and then they were very happy to see all that there is
there is a caring for their kids, to see all the resources that's been packed, to see all the tablet that's been sent to the families. They felt special, and everyone was happy to see that there is a care for them and for their kids. So it was a great program actually, and the last impact on all the children, and especially on Danny now, he is
studying independently during the school online. I don't have any difficulties with him. From that program, he studied a lot. He learned about technology, and then he now he is independent to use technology, to study online classes. And I could see from many families now they are studying online, because whenever they have struggle, they always share it with me. So I could see that all the kids, they have learned a lot about technologies during that program. That's actually, it's a great opportunity for them to have such an impact, a positive impact on them, because this online class has been extended, and then now it's great that they don't have any challenges from the technology. And many families actually, they've shared with me that their kids, they are learning a lot from that program. And then they thanked the JIAS agency for all the stuff that they have sent it to them, including tablets that they could study on, including all the teachers that they are teaching them. And I wish like for me, especially for Danny, to have more programs like that. If it's in person, it would be actually even better, but online, like within the lockdown, even if it's online, I hope they could offer more programs like that. And thank you so much.
I apologize. I put myself on mute and I think I may have cut off some of Faheemah's talk. So I do apologize. I heard some noise in the background and I was trying to be polite to all of the viewers today. A lot of stuff been covered in this session, and there's a number of questions. Rather than answer them one by one, what I thought I would do is I would group some of them together so that we can kind of have more of a conversation around it. So just on a quick technical point of view, there were some questions specifically, Judy, with regard to the day itself. How long was the day?
The program itself ran from 1 to 3:30, and we had a break. So we sort of had an hour, a break, and another hour. And Project Abraham ran the same time frame, but they ran on Mondays and Fridays. We did Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We picked that because then we wouldn't be impacted by any long weekends, but that's okay. As for, no, all the children were not here for 2 years. So we actually had some children who arrived in March and had never been to school. And we integrated them into the level 1 classes, and it was a struggle, but they got exposed to English. And we had some children who were here 3 years. I think the average was actually 2.5. And there was a couple kids who'd been here for 4 years or almost 4 years. So that's just the average. I hope that answers, Elise.
Great, I think so. And if I've not covered something properly, please put something back in the Q&A. There was a specific question with regard to one of your comments, Judy, about the topics that you avoided that could perhaps trigger trauma on the Canadian history. Can you share an example of one?
Sure. We avoided talking about the history of Indigenous people in Canada because there's a fair amount of unpleasantness. Canada, I mean, it doesn't shine the best light on Canada, and there could be triggering, right? As a population who underwent trauma. So that would be something we avoided. We obviously didn't talk about anything to do with world wars, anything like that. So we tried to pick topics that were upbeat and helpful and forward looking.
Wonderful, thank you so much. there was a lot of questions with regard to both mental health support that was integrated into the training, vicarious trauma that the teachers may have expected, and also when there was maybe an unexpected sign of trauma in the children. So perhaps you can talk about the trauma, and Annie, if you would like to pipe in on that, because I know that you used your expertise in that area as well.
So I could start by talking about what supports we built into the program. So we had art therapist come and do a session for each week. Our original vision of the program was a little bit different, which we would have done in person, and we would have incorporated more of a variety of programmings, probably some music, some other more recreational activities that would provide that therapeutic outlet. But it took a lot of troubleshooting, thinking about what would work in this online platform. And I think, to be honest, since then we've learned a lot more. And I think that going forward, offering programs, we could probably incorporate more of a variety of different therapeutic, recreational activities. But this was our first opportunity to facilitate those. There was only really one session in the art therapy where something did come up, and we discussed it as a team. We had the art therapist to provide support, and we dealt with it in that way. But we really tried to create an environment in the classes where those situations wouldn't happen. In terms of, as Judy mentioned, just keeping the content light and happy and kind of engaging and entertaining for kids of a variety of ages. So I don't think that there was really any vicarious trauma experienced by any of the teachers. But we did provide as well trauma. We have a standard trauma-informed care training that we have all of our volunteers, especially those working with vulnerable populations. So they did all have that specialized training that we have that we facilitate as well. I think there's something I'm missing from this.
Yeah, well, we monitored each of the classes. So during the break time, a lot of the teachers played music. So we were careful there to make sure that the lyrics, whatever, there was nothing triggering. I mean, it was just a lot of diligence and observation, making sure that whatever we did was appropriate. We did have some bullying going on, and that was where our principal's office came in handy. So where we noticed in the chat, children writing things that, or we noticed, I did notice in one of the classrooms, one of the kids was crying, and the teacher informed me that it seemed that one of the kids was bullying, and we just pulled that kid out into the principal's office and, you know, what's happening, why you're doing this, the usual stuff that a principal would do. And so we handled a number of problems that way.
There's also one other thing I want to add is that in the context of an online program, there is more risk. And there is less control that you have over the classroom and over working with the kids. So I think that caused us to be abundantly cautious in terms of how we were running the sessions and what content we were talking about.
And we also strictly enforced no recording of anything, no pictures taken of the kids. So we wanted to keep the kids feeling very safe.
Judy, perhaps you can also elaborate on something you've shared with me about how you also used movement in the program to engage the children, but also just to make them feel more comfortable. So that was part of the curriculum. It wasn't just learning literacy.
Right. So wherever possible, and certainly this was more applicable in level 1 than it would be in level 3. But for example, when we talked about firefighting, right, then I would go and see some of the teachers, you know, they were showing, okay, that the fireman takes the fire hose and he's putting out the fire. So can you all take your fire hoses and put out the fire? And just movement like that. So if we're talking about a library, okay, we all have a book. Okay, everybody open your book. Okay, let's read our book. So that kind of movement and getting the students involved. So it was really important. And the music at the break, and some of the teachers were doing dancing with their students, and just things that made them feel that they were in a real class, they were part of a real group.
I thank you so much. I also just want to add in, just to go back to a bit of the training that was asked about in terms of the training for the teachers. We take trauma very seriously in everything that we do at JIAS. And what I loved about this program is the way that Judy and Annie made sure to integrate it in all elements of the design to make sure that we were doing it in a way that we were aware and sensitive to this. But we also make available to all of our staff at JIAS who provides the settlement support to this community training and vicarious trauma. So there was also settlement workers that were available to teachers if they had questions about the community and how to deal with this. So if I notice that there's some new questions on the vicarious trauma, so if maybe you can just give a little bit more information on this, Annie, because a new question came in after we responded to that question.
Yeah, so there was a question talking about kind of the additional places where you can experience vicarious trauma, and especially in this context, in the lockdown context. So that's something that we're really addressing in our parent group. We have conversations with the parents about what's happening in their home environment now, what strategies are they implementing themselves. We talk about self-care. We talk about how to recognize signs in their children of what's going on with them. We talk about a whole range of things, and also just to provide that additional support to parents. We've noticed, I might be digressing a little bit now, but we've also noticed that for these parents, some of their trauma that they had experienced in Iraq is now more apparent for them in this context of the lockdown. So we're addressing that in a number of different ways within the context of the parent group. And that's kind of when we were talking about the holistic approach that we've taken to working with these families, that's kind of part of that as well.
I could add to that we did the teachers all had a whole day of training. So literally a 7-hour training session. It worked out. That was the only way we could do it. And we spent time there talking about trauma, making sure that they had attended the trauma training that JIAS provides, and making sure they understood what was necessary and what they had to do.
And JIAS staff had gone through training with a professional trainer on this back in February, March, before we thought we were going to be launching this program. So we actually made sure that the settlement team had that training so that everybody actually in the organization was given that and were given support material. So I don't have the name here, but if people want it later on, I'm happy to share the names of the people that we used, that we brought in to help us on that project. There were some specific questions that came in with regards to, was there any gender issues that arose with the children, Judy? I didn't think so.
There were no gender issues, but there were some interesting age issues and some interesting. So we had one family with 4 children. The oldest child was the lowest level. So it's not a gender issue, but it was an interesting dilemma. We originally thought that as you would do in a traditional school, that we should separate the children and try not to put one family in the same class, but it turned out that it actually worked better because of the internet issues, that we put children in the same family in one class. But we tried to avoid that where we were having a child in grade 9 in the same classroom as a sibling who was in grade 2. So that was more of an issue, but gender not at all.
I think it'd be interesting. I mean, there's some questions here about the evaluation metrics and families and teachers, and I know evaluation is a big part of what we do. Annie, can you perhaps talk a bit about, this was being done primarily as part of Ontario Trillium Foundation grant in terms of what they've acquired, but in terms of what you looked for in terms of, we had a hypothesis that we were testing before the program started, and then how did you collect data? And maybe you could also share some of the work you're doing with the school boards now.
Sure. I actually think Judy could also answer this question very well. She was very involved in our evaluation, but we evaluated a number of different things. We had those assessments at the beginning. We made the decision not to do assessments at the end to compare if there was a growth during that 4-week period. But in our current program, that's what we're doing. We have a pre-assessment and a post-assessment in terms of language level. And I see Judy wants to pipe in here. So go ahead,
So
Judy.
because the assessments weren't the way we wanted, what we did was we had the teachers do assessments every day. And they did a beginning and an end assessment. So even though I didn't repeat the assessment that I'd originally planned, because I never used that assessment and it didn't make any sense to repeat what I'd already done, we had the teachers do it. So we actually created a report which measured, what percentage of teachers thought their students had improved, and on what basis in speaking, reading, writing. Very little improvement in writing. It turns out very difficult to do through Zoom. So again, this was where we had to adapt what we wanted to do, but we've learned from that and we've really modified what we're doing for the literacy program so that we're going to have much cleaner metrics, less this is what I think and more objective.
We also did have, in addition, some feedback. We had a feedback session from the children themselves, but we also had a feedback session from the parents. So we had a focus group with parents that came to show that they could share their experience, and that so we could involve them in that capacity and understand what their experience was and what their children's experiences was from their perspective as well.
I think that there were specific goals that we set for the literacy program that are, can a child read a little better? Can they connect the letter A to the word apple? But there were certain goals that we had that are very hard to measure. How do you get a community that really hasn't had the opportunity to be exposed to the educational opportunities and make them excited about learning? How do you get a child who's never been read a bedtime story to be excited about learning to read? How do you get parents who've not been as engaged in the space to try and be more engaged? So, because it's not that they don't want to, they just don't have the tools or the resources. If a school sends an email to them and they can't read it or access their email, there's a big gap. And I think the biggest testament to this program has been what happened afterwards, that we have a parents group that is meeting on a weekly basis and thriving. The fact that they're talking about issues that we couldn't have imagined that they would have raised before. And Annie, I'd love if you can share the story about the agenda, about how parents didn't understand how that fit in, but it only came out because of this program. And the other thing that was a huge success is that we're now continuing an online tutoring program for the same population that's being run with volunteers. And a lot of training is going into training the volunteers to work with this community, which also makes public awareness about the Yazidi community. You're creating ambassadors. There's a whole host of things that we don't usually measure on the success of the program that we're seeing the results out of. So Annie, perhaps you can share that one event that happened in one of your parenting classes.
Yeah, so we originally designed the parent group to be 4 sessions. We had, and it started in September. So clearly it's become a much longer term program just for 4 sessions. But we had different topics for each days, and those topics actually took us much longer to get through. So that original 4 sessions that we planned ended up being 8 sessions, and then we've continued it on further. And part of the reason is that we've really learned that that we can't take things for granted. So one of the issues came up when we were talking about communication with teachers was the agenda. And so people who have been, I'm assuming it's like this in other parts of Canada, but anybody who's gone through school in Ontario knows that the government, the school board gives an agenda, and it's a means for teachers and parents to communicate with one another. So a teacher will write a note in the agenda, the parent will look at it the next day, and they will respond to it with another note, and they'll send it back. And that's how a lot of communication can happen between parents and teachers. And after 2 to 4 years of being in school, these parents didn't know what the agenda was or what it looked like. So we started talking about it, and we had one of the parents, some of the parents started pulling up books and saying, is this it? Is this it? No, that's not it. But one of the parents went to her kid's bag and she took out the agenda and she started pointing and telling everybody what it is, where the teacher writes a note, where they can write a note, and all those things. And so all the parents were learning from her how to use that agenda. And then we talked about how can they use that agenda to their advantage. So we even wrote on Zoom, like we used the whiteboard call me. And some of the parents took pictures of what we had written on the whiteboard, or if they could write it, they wrote it down themselves. So they would at least know that they had to communicate that message, that they wanted to talk to the teacher. And that was a conversation we thought was going to be about 5 minutes, and it lasted 45 minutes. So that's why those sessions went on quite longer. But really just seeing parents teaching each other was really just the wonderful experience from that session.
Every time I hear the story, I love that, Annie. Judy, one of the questions that came up, and I think this is dealing with a lot of people on this call and who are going to be watching it afterwards, is the issue of how do you keep children engaged in this prolonged pandemic mode, and any tools or hints you can perhaps share.
So let's start by being honest. The format we picked was not great for grade 1 students. 2.5 hours is way too long for a grade 1 student, and we would probably break it up very differently. On the other hand, for students older than 10, it was fine. So how do you do it? You make a variety of programs. So some of the time can be spent engaged in games. We had one class that played Jeopardy on, we had What's Around Your House, and I think the teacher made up a Jeopardy game. So here's the answer, and you had to ask the question. So the answer was vacuum cleaner, and you had to say, what is used to clean your carpet? I'm not sure that's the right choice, but so that we had lots of creativity in making games, we used songs. So the answer is in variety. It's the same as sitting in a classroom, right? If you've ever sat in a class or a lecture where the person stands in front of you and they go on and on reading from the whiteboard, you will fall asleep. And that's the same for students as well. So you have to engage them at their level. So you have you have grade 1 kids, and you have to have them running around. Okay, I want you all to find me a pencil. I want you all to find me a pot. I want you, okay, we're going to sing a song. Everybody's going to add a line to a story. We're going to go around. Okay, I'm going to read a book, and you're all going to stop me if I say something silly. All kinds of ways to teach, and it's just a matter of using all those modalities. That's why it was really important that we use trained teachers for this.
Thank you so much. I think one of the questions that was asked is whether or not we see continuing with this online format. For now, right now, in this mode, we are very dependent on Zoom. Moving forward, we know that we're going to move to some sort of a hybrid system. Many members of this community do not have cars or access to cars, so a big part of our original budget for actually creating this program pre-pandemic was looking at the transportation issue for the children. And because we weren't spending money on transportation, we had more money for the additional teachers to expand the program to 50 people. So unfortunately, it's not a matter sometimes of need, it's a matter of funding. And the project that we got funded for from the Ontario Trillium Foundation was specifically a pilot project to test a hypothesis and to learn more about a community. We're hoping to get more funding. We do have a donor who's been very, very generous. This couple who's been really helping us do a number of programs for the Yazidi community, including this parenting program. But it really will depend on what moves forward. We're very grateful for the generous support we get from groups like the IRCC, who really support the settlement work and make available a whole host of support services for this very vulnerable population. But we're going to have to adapt and, as Judy said, be creative. I have one closing remark, but before I give it, I just want to ask Annie and Judy if there's anything that you didn't say that you want to share, perhaps your big takeaway.
I think my big takeaway, and I think I've already said it, is if you have the right people and the right attitude, anything is possible.
Annie?
I always have trouble going down to one big takeaway, but I just really value how we've just been able to expand our work with the community during this time, and like I said, just shifting our lens into creating more holistic programs by being able to kind of see that community level, as opposed to looking at it at individual levels, and it does impact how we have approached additional programming and what we've considered in that. So that's my takeaway, I think.
Great, thank you. And I've got 7 C's for people to think about. I think you need courage to try out programs like this. My first big C is courage, because we had no template to follow. So we really had to start from scratch. I think the second C is commitment. We had incredible commitment all the way through the value chain of every person who was involved. So the funders were exceptionally flexible because they wanted this to succeed and to work. And so they were able to adapt with us so that we could adapt. The teachers were flexible. Everybody involved had that commitment. So that was huge. A huge amount of creativity. If you don't have someone who's creative on your project, it's not going to work, because what's tried and true is important, but you have to be willing to apply new ideas, and crises happen on a daily basis. What do you do when Amazon changes? Like we don't get an Amazon order. What do we do when the internet in the family's homes is not, they don't have the bandwidth to have 3 students at the same time? And so the ability to be creative and adapt was huge. Judy and Annie both bring, as well as the teachers, a tremendous sense of calm. And when you've got 48 kids trying to sign in at the same time, and some people forget to sign in, and someone's got to call up the family to make sure that there's no problem, you need those calm forces while everything around is moving. There was an incredible sense of community that takes place within the Yazidi broader community, and whether it was with the families themselves, whether it was Project Abraham, we thought we were only going to have 20 children if we were lucky sign up for this. The fact that we had almost every child that was eligible in this community participate says a great deal about having the support of a community, and they have to trust you. And I think it's because of the settlement work we've done with this community in the last number of years that made us a trusted agent of providing these services. And the last 2 points are, you have to be willing to collaborate and really work with other groups. And so we would have had a great program, but with Project Abraham, it just became so much better because the kids had something to do on a daily basis. And then the last is, you have to have a common purpose. And I think we weren't expecting to have children that could not read or write, be able to turn around in a 4-week window and become, avid readers of books. But we knew that we just wanted to help them pivot and start to love learning and to have the resources and tools to do it. And I can't thank this amazing team enough. This is one of the projects I'm the most proud about my work with JIAS. So thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions on this program, feel free to reach out to me at Elise, ELISEH, at jiastoronto.org. I'd be happy to connect you to the right people to answer your questions. And a huge thank you once again to the P2P community for letting us share our story today. Have a great day and stay safe.